So I only have 12 seconds for this introduction. Let's see if I can do that. Hey guys, so today we're taking a look at creating this Pomodoro application in reactjs, and I don't think I'm going to make it in 12 seconds, but as you guys can see, what this application does is that I am able to set my timer of how long I want to work. So let's try this out in 2 minutes. Let's see if I can go ahead and do it in 2 minutes, take a 10-second break in between, and maybe take a longer break of, let's say, 30 minutes. Let me set my timer over there, and let's try this introduction again within 2 minutes, and go. Hey guys, so today we'll be creating this Pomodoro application. For you guys who don't know what the Pomodoro technique is, so technically it's setting out a timer for yourself where you'll be productive, focus on your work, and then you take short breaks in between, but mine has an option where you could actually take a long break. So Pomodoro is going to help you stay focused and really dig into your work, and I think this application is going to be great. And as you guys have seen, what we will be building today is this simple countdown timer with this animation, and also with a settings tab where you can go and set the time of how long you want to work, how long your short breaks must be, and also how long your long breaks must be. I am able to pause this timer by clicking on this pause button down here, and I'm able to switch between what I'm doing by clicking on these buttons here on top. So I can go ahead and take a short break and just start that short break. If I feel like now it's been too long, I want to get back to work, let me just pause that. I can go back to work and run my work timer. So I am very excited in doing today's one. I hope you guys are as well. You got your Visual Studio Code open, you got npm installed on your machine, and you're ready to get started with this one. So let's head on over to Visual Studio Code. So before we get started coding this application, I would like to ask you guys to go ahead and click the subscribe button, click the bell notification button, so that you get notified every time I publish a new video or similar one like this. And if you like this type of content, go ahead and just smash that like button. It helps with Google algorithm for some weird reason, and share with friends and families or anyone you think would benefit from this video. That's the talk. Let's get to the coding. So with each and every React application, what you guys need to do is run npx create react app and let it run. And once that has run, you can go ahead and have this boilerplate or this files that React provide unto us for a starter for application. If you have those files right about now, then you are ready to get started. We are going to install just one package, and that package is called React Countdown Circle Timer. This is the package that's going to give us this nice animation of this countdown, as you guys can see. Also over here, just do that nice animation which just fades away as time runs out. So go ahead and do the following. If you are using Yarn, add it using Yarn, add React Countdown Circle Timer. And if you're using Node Package Manager, what you can do is just run npm I for install React Countdown Circle Timer and let that run. So once you've got that running, you should be where I'm at the moment with my file structure, with the package installed, and we are ready to get started with coding this application. So let's just make sure that everything has run. So I'm using Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go ahead and open up my terminal. I'm just going to run this using yarn start. And it's just going to run my local development server where I can actually see what this boilerplate provide onto us. So if we take a look at app.js, guys will see there's an import of a logo and app.css. We are going to get rid of all that. We are going to change everything within this application. And then we're going to use our own code that is going to generate us this nice Pomodoro application, as you guys can see it here. So because it's a biggish application, and it got a couple of files, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to focus on this page, the setup page or the set timer page. And once we have done this page, we're going to go ahead and focus on the Pomodoro page itself, or the animation page itself, and then we're going to come back to the app page where we actually hook everything up to work with each other. Let's quickly take a look here. So if you guys do have this, then you are ready to get started coding this application. So what I'm going to go ahead and do right now is just remove all the files that I'm not going to use in this application. So everything I'm clicking now, app.css, app.test.js, logo SVG, report web vitals, setup test.js. Those files I'm not going to use. I'm just going to hit delete. So I've deleted all of those files, and this error is actually correct. So I'm going to go ahead in my index.js file. I'm just going to remove all of these because I'm not going to use it. Same goes with that import. I'm going to remove it. I'm going to save that. And then in my app.js, I'm just going to remove everything in here. As you guys can see, I'm going to change my class name to container, and I'm going to add a h1 tag in here, which I'm just going to call Pomodoro. So whatever it's called. Let me remove this import, and I'm gonna add a tag over here. So that's gonna be small for small text, and I'm gonna say be productive the right way. Okay, so let's save that, and let's quickly refresh on this side and see if we can see that. There we go. So as you guys can see, I already added my CSS in my index.css over here, and that's why my things are already styled. We have the background color already going, and everything is using flex, align content, align item center, justify content center, and that's why it's nicely centered over here. So the first thing, as I've said, what we're going to do is we're going to work on our settings page, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So on our settings page, what I'm going to do first, let me go ahead and just create those folders that I'm going to use. I'm going to add a new folder here. I'm going to call it components, and I'm going to add a file here. First, it's going to be button.js. So I'm going to have a button that I'm going to use. Let's just go ahead and create this button and say react. Let's say react arrow function component export, and there you guys can see I have my button and it's exporting it, and this is just going to return a button for me. So I can go ahead and say button. So that's pure HTML button, and I'm going to pass a couple of params through to this button. Okay, so the first param that I'm going to pass through is a title, and the second one I'm going to pass through is active class, so to highlight when it's active or when it's not active, and then also a function. So this function I'm just going to call underscore callback. So I'm going to call and pass through a function to this, and let's just swoop this up. So over here I'm going to add a class name, and my class name is going to be equal to this active class, which I'm going to pass through, and whatever the button is going to be, it's going to be the title. And then next thing I need to do is actually hook up my onClick event. So onClick, that's going to be my underscore callback. All right, so whatever function I'm going to pass through over here, once the button is clicked, it's going to fire off that function, and that is my button component. I don't actually need this right here on top. Let's just remove that and have my button up like that. That should be fine. I'm going to save it, and that's my button component. So the next one that I'm going to have is my settings component, as I've stated. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's create inside of this component directory, let's create a new file. I'm going to call it set pomodoro.js, and this is the file where I'm going to do my settings, right? So let's go ahead and do the same here. Say react arrow function component export. Let's save it. So I have set Pomodoro over there, which is great. I'm gonna get started with the form first, and then I'm gonna work my way back up. Okay, so I know that this one is gonna have a form. I'm gonna have a div over here. I'm gonna add a class name to it. So my class name is form dash container. So here I'm gonna have my form. Right, that's my form, and only thing my form is gonna have over here, it's a no validate, and I'm gonna have a div in here, and this div I'm just gonna call it input wrapper. So class name, this is where all my inputs are going to be, input wrapper, and I'm gonna create my inputs inside of this div, and let's go ahead and do that. So this is going to be an input self-closing tag, class name, it's called my class name, and let's say name, it's equal to work. First one, work, and I'm gonna have an onChange event, and this onChange event is gonna fire off a function which is called handle change, and I'm gonna have a default value to this, and I'm gonna pass through my default value in a minute, and I think that's it. So I'm just gonna duplicate this 3 times, so 2 times down, and I'm gonna have my change this to short break, because this input is gonna be my short break, and I'm gonna change this one to long break. And then outside of this div, I'm just gonna have a button, so I can go ahead and import that button over here. So it's not picking it up, which is fine. I can go ahead and do it over here and just say import button from this current directory, button.js. Okay, that's what I'm importing over there. So what I'm going to pass through firstly is the title, which is going to be equal to set timer, and then secondly I want to pass through is the function, which is the callback. So my callback is going to be handle submit. So you're going to handle my submit. Okay, this is my form. So the only thing that I need to go ahead and hook up now is just create my values, my default values that are going to be changed using this input, and they're going to be set. And how I'm going to go ahead and do that is right here on top, const, and I'm going to call this new timer. I'm going to say set, lowercase set, new timer, which is equal to useState. It imports it, and this useState, it's going to be an object, and currently I'm just going to have work and a default value of say 30 seconds or 0.3, and I'm going to have short for short break with the default value of 0.2, and I'm going to have long break with a default value of 1 minute, and the active. So basically this active is what's going to indicate to us which timer to run. Okay, so currently we're going to set it on default to work, but this is going to be changed by the click of this button. So once this change, it's going to, so once active it's work, it's going to use that amount. Once active changes to short, it's going to use that amount. If it changes to long, it's going to use that amount. So this active state over here, it determines what time gets run in our application. Hope that makes sense. So let's go ahead and create those functions. So I can go ahead and say const handle change is equal to input. So this, you actually called it E if you want to for event or whatever. So I just call it input, and I'm gonna go ahead and say const destruction name out of this and value out of this input, and I can say it's equal to input dot target. Okay, so basically what I'm doing over here, instead of writing input.target.name or input.target.value, I'm just destructuring all of this out of this value so that I can use it in my switch statement. So let's go ahead and do that. So now I'm going to create a switch statement, and my key is going to be the name. So the name of the input, which is going to be either work down here, short break, long break, etc. So let me just close that sidebar over there by hitting Control B, and I have more space to work with. I'm going to go ahead and push that down as well. So I'm going to work with name, and then my case is going to be work. If the input I'm dealing with is the first one, because it's work, now do the following. I'm going to go ahead and update this. So I can go ahead and say set new timer, and the way I'm going to do that is just create an object. I'm going to spread the current object, which is new timer work. So this work over here, I'm setting it as the input that's being passed through here. So I can go ahead and say pass integer, and that integer is going to be the value. Okay, so what I'm doing now currently is saying that take this object that we've created here on top, okay, take everything as is, but then override the current value for this key called work, override it with whatever value this input has given onto us. Okay, so whatever that value is right here at the bottom, that's going to be set now to override this 0.3. Okay. And we're going to do the same for short and for long. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and say case. So my case is going to be short break. So the naming should be the same as within the input, short break. So if that's the case that I'm busy with, let's go ahead and say set new timer, and we're going to do the same thing, create a new object, spread the current object, new timer, and then the only thing we're going to change is short, and then short we're going to set to pass integer the value. So now this is short break, so I'm just setting the value of this input to override that current values there, and we do the same thing with the long break now. So that's break over there. Now let's go ahead and create break, and the last case we're going to say case. Now if this case is long break, we're going to do the following. We're going to say set new timer, create an object by spreading the current object, which is new timer, and then updating the value of long to the value that has been passed through by the input. Okay, so now that's set up. That's our on change event. So how we can test this quickly, let's go ahead and do a console.log and make sure we can see what's happening here. Okay, let me just make sure I'm inside of the right brackets. So over here I'm going to say console.log, and I'm going to log new timer right here at the bottom. So let's save this, and then what I'm going to do in my app.js, I'm just going to import that right here. So I'm going to say set Pomodoro, and I think it imported correctly. Yes, let's save it. Let's see if anything breaks. Refresh on the side, and now we got an error. So the error saying value can't be empty. So let's go ahead and set this value, because you already set up the object here on top. So our value is going to be new timer dot work. The same goes with this one, new timer dot short, and we have new timer dot long. Okay, let's save it. Let's refresh. So on default it should pick up those values as the default values, and we have a handle submit not defined. Let's quickly create that one, const handle submit. Just do that. So for this, on this handle submitted here, it's giving us an error as well. Let's refresh. Did I save this? Refresh this. Now as you guys can see, here we have our timer. So let's do this. Let me just move this to the bottom so you can basically see. Let's close that. All of that we don't need. So if I go ahead and change this to say 2, now you guys can see, because it's an on change event, it console.log that. But if I go ahead and change this to 3, we should see that the work has updated. Right, so let me take care of that, remove that console.log over there, and let's create this guy, this handle submit. Handle submit, I'm just going to pass through a e for event, and what I'm going to do is say e dot prevent default. So the only thing you want to do is so that once someone submit, it should not update or it should not refresh the browser. So if I go ahead and save this, let's close this, we know how it works now. Let's say refresh. Now let's do, I'm going to work for 30 minutes and I'm going to take a break of 10 minutes. I'm going to take a longer break of 25 minutes, set time over here. And as you guys see, it didn't refresh because of this. Now there's still one function which is missing over here, and that function is the one that is going to take this value or this object and pass it through to our context API. So that's the function we're actually going to use over here. But before we can import that function over there, we need to go create a context file, right? So I do think that the settings page is almost done. You just need that function. We can come back to that function. Let's go ahead and set up the animation page. So how we're going to go ahead and do that, setting up the animation page, we're going to create a new component. So let me just open my sidebar up again. So under components, I'm going to go ahead and create a new component, which I'm going to call countdown animation.js. So inside of this countdown animation, we're going to go ahead and use that package that we installed. And let's firstly go ahead and import that. React arrow function component export, and then we have that over there. And we're going to say in our return state, I'm going to pass through countdown circle timer, say enter. It automatically imported right there, so it's called circle timer. And I'm going to go ahead and close this. And now that is closed, I'm going to need a couple of things from my main file or my context file to actually make this run. But what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to set it up so that it runs automatically. First thing I'm going to set up, it's called a key, and I'm going to set up a timer, the timer, which is the amount of time that it needs to run, and animate, which is going to be a boolean, true or false, and also children. So children is basically just going to be the text that we see in this application right there. That's going to be the children. Okay, so I can go ahead actually right now and just pass children in over here. So this guy takes a couple of params. If we go back to this file over here, or the installation, you guys can see, so it has a is playing param, the duration of how long it must play, and different colors. So basically what this colors does is you can set it up to say on 0.33 give me a different color, and then this is like percentage, this is like divided by 3, would you give you something around to 30, 35, 34 point something. So 34 point something percentage into this countdown, make the color whatever that color is, and then you change the color. As you guys can see right here below, it gives us that illustration as the less the time goes, the more the color changes. As you see, it went from orange now like a darkish green, and it hits 0. So that's what this basically does, but we're gonna have one color. We don't need all of those different colors as it comes down. So let's go ahead and set up a couple of these that we are going to use. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit enter right there, go back up, hit enter, and then indent it. So I'm gonna set up the key to be equal to my key that I've passed through right there on top, and I'm gonna go ahead and say is playing. So is playing is actually a boolean value, so is playing, I'm gonna go ahead and do this, so it's gonna be animate. That's my is playing. I'm gonna set up my duration, how long it must be. So basically it's gonna be my timer times 60, because my timer counts in 60 seconds. So if I want it to be in minutes, I'm going to time it by 60, so I have actually minutes instead of seconds. Okay, so I have my duration right over there, and then let's go ahead and set up this colors. This colors, I'm just going to go ahead up and set up hashtag FE6F 6B, right? And I'm going to say 0.33. So I'm just going to have that one color. Just make sure it's FE 6F, FE 6F, and then I have 6B. That's my color. So now the only thing I need to set up is just kind of the more stuff like the stroke, how thick I want it to be. So my stroke width, I'm going to set it up to 6, nice and thin. My trailer color, so basically what this trailer color is, hashtag I'm going to show you guys now. What do I mean? 1519332. Okay, so this trailer color is that grayish color you see right there. So you can set it to be any color, but I've set mine to be the same as the background color so that it seems like it's disappearing. But if you actually give it a different color, you can see that trailing color, which will follow this one as it moves along. So as if you set it the same as the background color, it will give you this disappearing effect as if nothing is happening. That's my trailing color. And then next function that I want to do, or the next I want to add, is to say onComplete. So once you've hit 0, do the following, run this function for me. And the only thing you're going to do with this function is stop animation, stop animate. So stop animate is a function that I'm also going to pass through from our context.api. So what I'm going to do now, so that this doesn't give me an error, I'm going to do the following. I'm just going to put this guy in its own line so that I can comment it out, and I won't get an error if I do that, because this we're actually going to need. Then I'm going to save this. Let me go back to this actually and add that function is here as well, so that I don't forget to add this function, and just comment it out. So I'm going to call this, it's called update execute, and I'm going to pass through the new timer. So I'm passing through this object via this function. So I'm going to comment that out. So now there's a function I need to pass through here. There's a function I also need to pass through here to make sure that it stops as soon as it hits 0. And I think that is it. The only thing that I need to do over here right now, maybe just go ahead and set this. So I'm going to set the key to 1. I'm going to set the timer to default 20. Animation I'm going to set to true, because currently it's false. I'm going to set it to true. And then the children I'm just going to leave right as is, but it won't display anything. I'm going to import this guy, and I just want to see if it will show something or maybe throw an error. I have no idea, but let's quickly see this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that one out and import, I call it countdown circle. Yeah, let's do this. If I save it, see if we have any errors. Okay, we don't really, can't access property map is undefined. Okay, I expected something like this because we are missing the children over there that we're not using. But let me just comment this one out and save it. Let's see if it changes anything. Okay, so it's fine. You are expecting to receive some errors until we have set up our context API file, and I think we are ready to do just that. We are ready to set up our context API file, and then we'll go back to our app file where we'll just structure everything to say, if we were displaying the animation part, don't display the settings page or component, and vice versa. If we're displaying this the settings component, don't display the animation component. Okay, so we're gonna come back to this. So let me just save this, both of them in there, so that we have something to look at here while we code the wildest part of this application. So let's go ahead and do that. What I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna clear everything out over here, and I'm gonna close that. I'm gonna create a new file, new folder inside of source directory. I'm going to call this one context, and I'm going to create a new file inside of context directory, which I'm just going to call SettingsContext.js. Right, so what we're going to do with this one first, let's go ahead and just say react function component export. Okay, that's our settings context, but I'm going to change this actually to say settings context provider. So I'm changing that to settings context provider, and let's set up our context. So I'm going to say export this variable const setting context, it's equal to create context, and that's going to be empty. So I'm not going to pass through anything over there by creating that context. And then the next thing I want to do is actually go ahead and wrap everything up within the settings context. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, change this div to settings context, same with this one, and I'm going to say setting context dot provider. So it's going to be a provider, and there's going to be a couple of values that it's going to provide throughout this application, and those values I'm going to pass through over here to make them available throughout the entire application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap my entire application with this context provider, the entire application, so which means that the entire application is going to be a child of this component. So I can go ahead and do the following here and say props dot children, and I'm going to pass through my props over there as well. So now we got the bare bones settings going of this application. Let me just save this and go to my index.js and change React strict mode over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and just say, instead of using React strict mode, I want you to use my provider. So settings context provider, and I'm gonna wrap app with settings context provider. I'm going to remove strict mode from this. There we go. We're wrapping the entire application with the settings context provider, as you guys can see. So everything here is actually a child of this, and thus I'm able to pass through values, functions to this entire application. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's see if we have broken anything on this side of the world. So that is still working. Now let's go back and work with the settings context file. So let's first start off with just setting our variables that we're going to use in this application. So I'm just going to make some space in there for me to work with. So I'm going to say const. I'm going to call this one Pomodoro. So this is the one that's actually going to run my entire application as the value. So I'm going to say set my Pomodoro. And this one is going to be by default use state. So by default I'm just going to set it to 0. And let's do another one. I'm going to say const executing set executing. So basically what this one is going to be executing. So basically, sorry, I'm trying to type and speak at the same time. This one, what it's going to do, is going to be that object that actually comes from the settings page that we created earlier. So he's going to be the carrier of that object with all the settings that have been set, which is the amounts that you actually want to work. So, and let's set up another one which is called start animate. It's actually just start the animation, set start animate, which is equal to use state. And use state is going to be false. So on default nothing is going to run. So let's start off firstly with the most easiest function that we're going to have. It's the start the animation function, pause animation function, and stop the animation function. So let's go ahead and do that. So I can go ahead and say function start timer, and only thing you're gonna do is say set start animate to true. That's all you're going to do. And next one, I'm gonna say function pause timer, and if you guys has guessed it, set start animate to false. And the same goes with the stop animate, which is also going to be false. So I can go ahead and just say copy this down and say function stop timer. So the stop timer is going to do the same thing. It's going to set it to false. And if you guys remember earlier, we had a function that we commented out here, which was this one, stop animate. I'm just going to update it to say stop timer instead of stop animate. And I'm going to uncomment this so that you guys can see how I'm going to pass it through to this file using the context API of React. So basically these are the three functions that are already created. So I can go ahead here in value and say pass through stop timer, which is this entire function. So I'm passing it through as a value right there. I'm going to save it. So now I can go to countdown timer and just import that and use it here. So how I'm going to go and do that, I can go ahead and say const destruction. So from this variable, take this, which is called stop timer, and that's going to come from use context, and then you need to import it right there. So import use context, and the context that I'm going to use, it's called setting context. So I'm taking this value or this function from this context that has been provided throughout the application. This is how I am going to access everything within this file. I'm going to access it through calling the use context method, and I'm going to pass through the exported const over here variable, I'm going to pass it through as a param, and that's going to strip out everything that I'm actually sending out in the values. Everything I'm sending out as a value, it's going to strip it out, and I'm able to use it throughout my application. So that's what's basically happening over here. I'm stripping out the stop function from this context file, and I'm using that function right here at the bottom. So I can go ahead and save this. So there's nothing actually to show you now at the moment. I'll only be able to show you how that works once the entire application is completed. So let's continue. So we have our start function, we have our pause function, we have our stop function that stop the timer, start the timer, pause the timer, and stop the timer. So the next thing that we're going to do is update this object over here. And how we're going to go ahead and do that, we're going to create a new function, const update execute, which is going to take in a param that it's updated settings, and with that param it's going to call the set execute state function right here on top. It's going to call that, and I'm just going to pass through this updated setting. So basically this updated setting has to be an object. So if you guys remember as well, on this set Pomodoro page, we had a function over here that we wanted to use to pass through the updated object of this new timer. So that's the object that we want to pass through. So here I can go ahead and say uncomment this update execute, and we have that over here. That's the function update execute, which is just going to take in one param as an object, and it's going to set that object equal this object executing object, which is an empty object, equal to the one passed through to it. So now let's go ahead and do the same thing with this one. So I can go ahead and say update execute. So I'm passing through that function over there. Can save it, and I'm going to go to this page, the set Pomodoro page. I'm going to do the same thing over here right on top. I can go ahead and say const update structure update execute, and that I'm going to call from use context, and the context that I'm using is settings context. I'm pulling that out from settings context to use on this page. So I'm going to save that, and if I go ahead and go back to my app.js and uncomment this, I should not have an error. So let's go ahead and refresh. There you guys can see I don't have an error because it is receiving that function from the settings context. So now that we have that, let's set up a new function which I'm going to call setTimer, and what that function is going to do is more or less the same functionality that this function does, this handle change, which is a switch statement. And what it's going to do, it's going to determine which one must be set as active depending on the click. Okay, so it's going to take in an object, it's going to take in a param, and it's going to evaluate which one must it be. Must it be set to work, then it's set the time to work, or must it be set to short or long break, and it's going to set that to the value that's going to be run inside of this main animation. So let's go ahead and do that. It will make sense in a minute. So settings, so next function I'm going to create, I said I was going to call it setTimer. So the setTimer time, and this one is going to take in a param which I'm just going to call evaluate. If I misspelled it, please let me know in the comments. So I'm also going to run a switch statement over here, and then my key is going to be evaluate dot active. You guys remember this active? So where this active comes from in my settings, it is this value over here. So I want to check on which one is this active, and depending on that, we're either going to set it to that work, or we're currently taking a short break, or we're currently taking a long break, depending on what the active label currently is. So let's go ahead and do that. So over here I'm going to say if active is on work, then my main file, which is the one right here on top, Pomodoro, I'm going to set that to the value of work. And how I'm going to do that is to set it to evaluate dot work, and there's a break. So I'm going to do this a couple of times. Just make space there for readability. So if it's short, then set evaluate here to short, and if it's long, set it to long. And let's say I made a mistake and I haven't set anything, so what I'm going to do is to say set Pomodoro back to 0. So my label, if I didn't set my label to work, no short, no long, so it's just going to set everything back to 0. So because I have this, I need to be able to pass through that object as well to this function. And how I'm going to do that, I'm just going to call it inside of this update execute, call the same function, say set timer time, and I'm going to pass through the updated settings. So I'm passing the same object to this function over here, and this function is just going to run and evaluate which timer are we currently working with. Is this guy working, or is he busy taking a short break, or is he busy taking a long break? So that's what that function is going to do. And then the next thing that I actually just want to do is just do a settings button function. So I'm going to go ahead and do that one right below the stop function right here. So I can go ahead and say const settings button, which is the button that we clear to actually see the screen, the button that we click to see the screen. And what this button is going to do is just the following. He's going to reset everything. So set executing back to an empty object, and then set Pomodoro back to 0. So this button just resets everything. So the only thing I think I still need to do right now is to go ahead and set the current timer so that it picks up the current timer using all of this function that we just created right now. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go ahead and go here and say, or maybe let's do it right here on top above all of these. Let's just say function set current timer. So my current time is going to take in a param, which is active state. So I'm going to call this active underscore state. So I'm going to say update execute, and what I'm going to do is the same. To say create a new object by spreading the current one and just changing a value of active, and I'm setting active to active state. So this active state is going to be a string, either going to be work or short or long, and that is going to update automatically this object. Doing that, and the next thing I'm going to do is a set timer time, and I'm going to pass through the current object. So in this function run, what I want to do is I want to set the current state, the active state label, and then I'm going to set this timer, which is this function. It's going to run again to set Pomodoro timer and set that to the current working one. So a bit of a tongue twist there. Let me just move this one down here so I can better explain it. I'm just going to go ahead and cut that function, close my side thingy there, and maybe just move it right here. So let's have a look at this one. So basically what this set current time is going to do, it's going to receive an active state label, which is either going to be work, short, or long, right? And it's going to update the current object, this execute object, by spreading all the values that's in there and just updating this key active to whatever active state it is. So it's going to update it to whatever string it is of these three, and it's going to call this function, the set timer function, to say now I need you to go ahead and reset this Pomodoro value. It's either going to be work or short or long. So whatever's been set over here, reset it for me depending on the active state. So the only thing now left for me to do within this page before exporting everything, I just need to go ahead and create a function that is actually going to take in this timer string over here. So that I can go ahead and do right here at the bottom. I'm gonna go ahead and say const children is equal to remaining timer. So as you guys can see, I'm destructuring this remaining timer, and I'm gonna go ahead and set up my minutes by saying const minutes that equals to math.floor. So I'm gonna go ahead and say math.floor, and I'm gonna pass through this remaining timer. Let me pass that through. Let me just scroll down so you can see it better. Remaining timer divided by 60. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and set up my seconds. I'm going to say my second is equal to the remaining timer and the remainder from 60. And let's go ahead and return this. So now I can go ahead and say return. I'm going to use my backticks, so I can use variables and also string. So I'm going to say minutes, and I'm going to do my colons over there, and I'm going to pass through my second. So basically now I can go ahead and say minutes and say M for minutes space, and I can go ahead and say dollar and say seconds and do S for seconds. But what I want to do, I'm just going to keep it simple, do it this way, and I'm returning that. Now let's save it. So now what we need to do is actually pass through everything that's going to be used outside of this file, and everything is going to be used outside of this file. So what I'm going to do is, let me make this a bit bigger, and I'm going to split this file into two. Do this, and I can go down to this value prop over here, and I can start passing through everything so you guys can actually see everything that's being passed through. So let's start from top. I'm going to need this value over there in my app file, so let me go ahead and pass you through. And executing, I'm going to need you. Start animate, I am going to need you, because this one I'm going to set in a different file, so I'm not setting start animate from this file. Start timer, my button is going to make use of this one. Pause timer, also a button, it's going to make use of this one. Stop timer is already being passed through right there on top. A settings button, this is also going to make be use of a button. Set current timer, I'm going to pass you through as well, and I'm going to pass through, let me see, the set current timer. Update execute function, pass you through, and I think that's it. Set timer time, it's going to stay on this one, and the only thing I need to pass through also is this children over here, which this animation actually circle is going to make use of. So if we take a look at this, let me go ahead to the docs repository. So I just want to show you guys exactly where this child comes in. So I've passed through everything I need to pass through. Let me just save this, and I can close this so that this can go a bit bigger as well. So let's take a look at this. So right here at the documentation, here it is. So basically it has a function which has this remaining time, which is a number, and that it's going to be used for us to go ahead and calculate the time and also display that in the component itself. In the center, if you want to show something in the middle of the center, you need to make use of this, and you have to send it through called as children. If you change this to something else, it won't really work. So you need to call it children, and that content will be or timer will be placed within the circle, in the middle of the circle. Hope that makes sense. So let's go back to this guy. Now that I've passed everything through from my settings, we're gonna firstly go back to app, and we're gonna go create a couple of stuff in app, my app file. So let me just open up my sidebar, and let's close this, go to app, let's close that file. So the first thing that I want to do is import that Pomodoro. I want to do an if statement on that Pomodoro. So how I'm going to go ahead and do that, const, and I'm going to go ahead and say Pomodoro, and I'm going to say not from equal to use context, and the context I'm going to use is called SettingsContext. So this is the first one I'm going to use, and how I'm going to use that for my if statement. I'm gonna go right here and say if is 0, so which means no time was set on him. So if this guy is 0, don't show anything. So this guy is equal to 0. If this guy is equal to 0, then let's say if it's equal to 0, then do the following. Show, let's get my indent correct over here. Show this guy. Show the set, so that we can actually go set you to be something else instead of 0. Else, so let's say else if that's not the case, let's do react fragments over here, then show everything within this react fragments. So I'm gonna say, let's check first if this guy is 0. If he's 0, show the set guy. If not, show whatever's in this frag guy. So I'm gonna go ahead and do an h2 over here. Now let's do an h3 and say testing if set is 0. Let's say save. So if we save this and we refresh, setting context is not defined, which means setting context didn't auto import. Let's try it again. There we go. Setting context now auto imported. So let's go ahead and remove this circle countdown timer that I'm not going to need. I don't think I'm going to need that. Let's remove that for now. If we do need it in the future, we can always set it back. So let's go ahead and say if this is not 0, so I want to show this. Just want to make sure that this works, my if statement works. So as you guys can see, my if statement does work, because now it's saying testing if set to 0. So let's set it back. And now let's go ahead and start creating this look and feel of this function. So we're going to start right on top with those 4 buttons, 1 2 3 4, and those 4 buttons are actually just going to go in here. So I'm going to start off by saying unordered list. I'm going to give my unordered list a class. So this class name is going to be labels, and inside of this I'm going to have my list item. Inside my list item, I'm going to have my button. So let me just import my button over there, and my button is going to have a couple of stuff. Self-closing, so I'm going to pass through a couple of stuff in my button. The first thing is going to be my title, and my first title is going to be work. As you guys can see, I called it work right there on top. Just make this smaller again. And after my title, I'm going to pass through my active class. My active class is going to be executing dot active. So we're going to pass executing dot active right now. So if executing dot active is equal to work, then what I'm going to do is say active label. So I'm going to pass through a class called active label as my active label, or else just pass through undefined. And let's add that callback. Then I'm going to quickly explain to you what happens there with the class. So callback, it's going to say on click set current timer, and I'm going to pass through work callback equal to. So now we need executing and set current timer. Let's go ahead and call that in. So we're going to pull that from our settings context, pulling it in, and also set current timer. And now we have that there. So basically what's happening here with this active class is to say, get this object called executing and check the active state. If the active key of this object is equal to work, then set the active label to this button, or else just make it undefined. So we can actually go ahead and shorten this by just doing that and saying and just removing this. So if this evaluates to be true, just add the string. That's it. So now I can copy this 3 times, as you guys can see, because those are the 3. And I'm going to go ahead and change it. I'm going to say short break, and this one I'm going to go ahead and say long break. Those are my buttons, and then here I need to go ahead and pass through short, passing the string, and this one I'm passing through a string called long. Let's save this and let's see how it looks on our current app. So as you guys can see, there we have our 3 buttons right there at the bottom. So no label is showing as of yet. Let me update this as well. This also needs to be updated. Short. So let me just save that. So there's no labels, there's no active showing as of yet, because the settings has not been hooked up. The settings page has not been hooked up completely as of yet, but once we get there, you guys will see what I mean. So now the next one we need to do is just our setting button. And all our setting button does is just resets everything. So let me go ahead and say button. So I'm going to say title. I'm going to call this settings. And my callback, it's going to be equal to setting. Let's just quickly go check in here, not there. Context settings. Where's our reset button? There we go, setting button. So that's the one I'm looking for. So that's gonna be setting button. And close the curly braces. And that's it. So now I need to go ahead and import this as well. I'm gonna go ahead and say setting button. So now that's also imported, and that's our setting button. The next thing now we need to do is just do our display of our Pomodoro timer right here at the bottom. So let me go ahead and create a div firstly. It's gonna wrap it. So I'm gonna call this div, give it a class name. Class name it's called time wrapper. And inside of this div, I'm create another div, which is actually this one. The one I need to create is time wrapper. This one I'm just gonna call time container. Time container. Then I'm gonna create a div. This one I'm gonna call a class name time wrapper. So Visual Studio, remember that. And I'm gonna go ahead and import this countdown. So countdown animation. What I'm gonna do is do an import right here on top, just below that one, which also component. Let's say import countdown animation from components / countdown animation. So I just need to make sure I'm spelling this correctly. Yes, it's spelled correctly. And then let's pass through that for children over here that we created in an either file for this animation to work. So I'm passing through the children. I'm going to need to import that one as well. I'm just going to go ahead and say children. And I think it's going to get a bit long, so let's go ahead and put each one in its own line. So everything just stays kind of visible as to what we are doing. There we go. So we imported the children, and now we're going to pass through a couple of stuff over here. Because if you guys do remember that I did have some params for this guy. So those params over there, those are the ones you're going to go pass through now. So let's go ahead and pass through our key. So firstly, our key is going to be equal to Pomodoro. And secondly, I'm going to pass through my timer, which is the same thing. So my timer is also going to be the amount that Pomodoro is currently is, which is won't be 0 because I'm already doing an if statement on top just to check. And I'm going to pass through animate. So animate is going to be start animate, and we need to import start animate from the use context. Now that we've imported it, and I think that's it for the countdown animate. So the next thing we need to do is just add those buttons. It's actually going to start this and pause it as well. And we can go ahead and do that by adding another div right here at the bottom. And this div, we're going to go ahead and say class name is equal to button dash wrapper. So this guy's going to wrap my buttons, and I'm going to pull in the button self-closing tag, pass through a title to it, and this title is called start for start animation. I'll pass through an active class to it, So my class name, it's going to be if start animate is not true. So if start animate over here is actually false, do the following. So I can say and put the active class on this guy, and I'm gonna pass through my function, which is my callback, and this function is actually start timer. And let's go ahead and import that start timer here on top as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this button, and this one is start, so the other one should be pause, and this one is gonna be the opposite of the one on top. So if start animate is false, so if this is false, which meaning that it is running, then this one is the active one. Let's go ahead and do that, and let's say pause timer, and let's go import that one as well on top. Pause timer, and let's save it, and let's see, do we have any errors? What is this? So I can go ahead and remove this. That guy we don't need anymore. Seems like we do have an error. Let's quickly check that error out, saying on line 50 time is not defined and container is not defined. Let's see. So I've actually, that's supposed to be a string. Sorry about that. It's supposed to be a string. Say time container. Save it. Let's refresh on this side. I think the issue is with this guy. Is it this one? No, it's the countdown animation with this colors over here. Let's go ahead and do this and this. Let's save it. Like an array of arrays. So we see something, but we don't see anything as well, because now what we do have is not a number. Now let's quickly go see where do we define this that is actually telling us now that it's not a number. So that's in our settings over here, and that was the child function. So here's our child function. So we currently set up our minutes and our seconds. Looking back at the documents, let's quickly check. I think just want to make 100% sure over here is initial, that's initial time, initial remaining time. So I think remaining time is misspelled. Should be remaining time and not remaining timer. So let's quickly remove those R's. And let's save this, and let's quickly check. So you guys can see it's remaining time instead of remaining timer. Let's go back to our application. Let me just refresh this, and let's set the timer. As you guys can see, we have our 18 seconds to run this clock. So there's an issue right here with my circle. That's because what I've done is in countdown animation, I actually set the size to 20. I need to increase that to 220, and let's save it, and let's refresh. Let's set it the time again. There we go. So that looks nice. Just need to check on the spacing right here, why this is not right at the bottom. But let's click start, and as you guys can see, I don't get my active class at the moment, but the animation works smoothly. So let's pause this. It does pause. Let's quickly go check as where are my active classes, what's happening there. So I'm gonna go down to my buttons right here at the bottom. Let's make sure these are my button wrapper, button tile start, button tile stop, and the class I want to add is called active. That should be correct. And let's see, start animate. So if start animate is false, I want it to be on this button. I also want it to be on the pause button. So the class is called active. Let's save this. Let's refresh this, and let's see. I just did a hard refresh quickly. So I'm gonna change this to 30 minutes, and I'm gonna change this to let's say 10-minute break, short break, and I'm gonna change this to 45-minute long break, and let's set the timer. That updated correctly, as you guys can see. If I click on my short break, click on my long break. So my long break took a while to just update, but let's quickly check as why is it updating. It's nagging. So let's start this first. Timer started, but the class didn't get active. So I'm just gonna let it run quickly while I check if I misspelled something. Right, so I forgot something over here. What I need to do, I just need to use effect to make sure that this function runs on component load. So I'm going to say use effect. All right, so I'm just going to do an arrow function, and the function I want to run, it's called update execute, and I'm going to pass through my executing object, and then this needs to run every time execute updates or start animate that function gets fired. Sorry about that. So let's quickly check that. So I need to import this function, update execute. So let's save that and let's quickly check this. So I'm gonna go ahead here and refresh. Let's say set timer. So we have that on work. Short break updated automatically. Long break updated. Start animation. The start animation still works, but then the buttons doesn't work. So guys, we went over an hour with this one. Wasn't really planning on it, but you guys can go ahead and figure out with that active and non-active class and what is the issue there. Hit me up in the comments if you found the issue. Let me know what's the issue so I can fix it on my side as well. But that is how we're gonna create a Pomodoro app using React. If you guys like this type of tutorial, go ahead and like this video. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification button so you get notified every time I publish a video like this one. If you guys would like to see me do more type of this videos, hit me up in the comments, let me know. This design of this video is inspired by Front End Mentor. I suggest you guys go check out that website. They have nice designs there. Yeah, go ahead and check it out. Until next time guys, stay safe.